All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katie Crocker. I am the MC for today's event. I hold several roles today. First, as the Chief Executive Officer of AMSSA, the Provincial Umbrella Association for Immigrant and Refugee Serving Organizations here in British Columbia. I am also the Interim Co-Executive Director of CISSA ACSEI, the Canadian Immigrant Settlement Sector Alliance. I am very pleased to welcome you here today, and I wish to acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded and ancestral territory of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, and I wish to express my gratitude for being on this land here today. I wish to thank ISS of BC for providing the space for this press conference. I can think of no better place in BC to host this press conference, as the ISS of BC Welcome Centre is a unique facility that truly represents what you'll be hearing more about shortly. The coming together of settlement organizations, government, and private sector to support refugees and other displaced newcomers. I am now pleased to introduce Chris Friesen, my co-interim executive director of CISSA ACSEI, to provide a brief description of CISSA ACSEI, highlighting national efforts on the post-arrival phase. Over to you, Chris.
Good afternoon, everyone. As we all watch in horror at the daily atrocities unfolding in the Ukraine, it is against this backdrop that Canadians from coast to coast to coast are moved in numerous ways to help displaced Ukrainians who have begun to arrive in small numbers daily in this country. Looking back, whether it was our response as a country to the Vietnamese boat people, the Asian Ugandans fleeing Idi Amin, Operation Parasol for Kosovar, or most recently, the Syrian refugee resettlement movement, and presently the Afghan Special Initiative. The Ukrainian humanitarian operation currently underway stands out as unique in many ways and requires our collective efforts. Hundreds of thousands of temporary residents, whether international students or temporary foreign workers, quietly enter this country each year and navigate their own supports, including housing. For most Canadians, these temporary residents remain under our collective radar screen. Displaced Ukrainians arriving under the Canada-Ukrainian Authorization for Emergency Travel program poses unique challenges for the post-arrival phase. While immigration is a shared federal-provincial jurisdiction, most of Canada's settlement supports for newcomers are geared towards permanent, not temporary residents. Additionally, provincial and territorial legislation and regulations are not necessarily in place to support temporary residents and visitors, whether that means access to income support or health care without the usual 3-month waiting period. Displaced Ukrainians are a hybrid between temporary visitors with refugee-like support needs. Furthermore, the urgent Canadian immigration measures put in place to expedite the processing of Ukrainians came understandably with no target or limit, no arrival time frame, or intended destination plan, as is the case with resettled refugees. This is why the Ukrainians arriving with temporary resident status is truly a unique humanitarian operation in Canadian history. But uniqueness comes with challenges. What are we doing to put in place post-arrival supports? Unlike other countries such as Poland that has opened their borders to 2.5 million Ukrainian refugees so far without any pre-existing settlement sector infrastructure in place, Canada is truly blessed, without a doubt, with the most comprehensive support offerings and infrastructure for newcomers in the world. Through CISSA ACSEI's national network of over 500 immigrant-serving agencies across the country, working in close collaboration with IRCC, displaced Ukrainians on temporary resident visas will now have access to immediate access to the wealth of federally funded national settlement programs and services, including first language supports, adult English and French as an additional language classes, employment search assistance, skill training, access to volunteer settlement mentors, settlement case management, immigrant women's program, settlement workers in schools, etc. This is a game changer to make our collective work much easier. So thank you, Minister Fraser, for making this happen and your leadership on this. I suspect you'll hear officially from Minister Fraser in a few moments on this subject. On a national basis, CISSA ACSEI, with the financial support of IRCC, has launched a national secretariat under the heading Operation Ukrainian Safe Haven, a first in Canadian history, a new model for how we respond to the post-arrival phase of a humanitarian operation. Here in this room, if you can wave, we have some members of the National Secretariat, Thomas Redalai, Navar Bailey, Naryala Tanai, Ile Nagoyi, who she is watching live stream based in Ottawa. The National Secretariat, and through its website, will act as a national clearinghouse focal point for targeted donation, interested volunteers, communication, multilingual help site for Ukrainians, and housing offers, to name but a few. So this is what is officially launched today. It is, and through this website, our mission is to provide links on the national website to the various support initiatives emerging across Canada in each province and territory, essentially a national virtual one-stop shop. While the website is officially up as of today, full functionality will be in place later this month, understanding that the post-arrival planning and support phase will continue to evolve over time. This is and will continue to be a work in progress. Under the CISSA ACSEI National Secretariat on Operation Ukrainian Safe Haven, a national steering committee has been formed and has just completed our third weekly meeting yesterday. Over 100 key stakeholders, currently co-chaired by the National Secretariat and IRCC. In fact, our IRCC co-chair, Corinne Prince, is with us today if you want to wave. Meets weekly with representatives from several federal government departments, provincial territorial governments, provincial coordinating tables, the Canadian Red Cross, local immigration partnership tables, national and regional Francophone organizations, immigrant employment councils, and the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, to name but a few. It is this group of key stakeholders who have been shocked into action and seized by the evolving, unprovoked war in Ukraine to tackle and find solutions to incredibly challenging post-arrival support components. But we are making steady and real progress, punctuated with the occasional miracle. Is this process a little messy, foggy, sometimes chaotic, as we collectively lean in real-time, fix-it mode to ensure a national safety net is in place? Absolutely. Do we have all the answers today? No. Will we solve some entrenched collective issues such as access to affordable housing stock? No. But the National Steering Committee members and other key stakeholders in Ottawa and in every provincial territorial capital are actively working around the clock to find solutions. To give you a sense of our weekly National Steering Committee, I would describe them as 90-minute hackathons focused on different post-arrival phases, from port of entry, access to emergency income support, short and long-term housing, including home share offerings, the handling of donations and volunteer offers. This is another unique, historic opportunity to display the best that we can offer to Ukrainians in their time of need. Together, we will succeed in this all of Canada humanitarian call for help. We will and must stand up for Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Next, it is my pleasure to introduce the Honourable Sean Fraser, Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. Minister Fraser.
Look, let me start by saying a huge thank you for having me here today. It's a real pleasure to be with you, Katie, Chris, Nathan. So good to see you again. And maybe I should start off by saying, Nathan, it's really good to be pulling in the same direction rather than having you dumping on us in the House of Commons as you used to do so effectively. So it's a pleasure to be here with you in British Columbia. Look, I got to say the last number of weeks have been just extraordinary to watch unfold for the worst possible reason. We've seen a war of aggression launched by Vladimir Putin with a further invasion into Ukraine, challenging the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and right to self-determination of the Ukrainian people. This is the kind of thing that I recall studying out of academic interest, but to now be living it with such a real-time practical application is horrifying beyond words. If I take any silver lining from the last few weeks of my experience serving as Canada's Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, it's that Canadians, not just at the different levels of government or the settlement sector, but Canadians in our communities from every corner of this country have said that we want to do our part. There's no question in my mind, to Chris's point, that Canada is the very best in the world when it comes to resettling people for humanitarian purposes. But this latest challenge is like nothing we've ever seen. This need to respond in real time to people who are seeking a temporary safe haven is not something that our systems that pre-existed this war of aggression were designed to do. We've invented from scratch a temporary protection model. And I like the way you described it, sort of a build it as you go. When you invent something new to respond to a crisis, you understand that there are obstacles that reveal themselves along the way, and you have to adjust as you go. And I've been so proud of the way that I've seen our government, provincial governments, local governments, and Canadians adjust.
Le Canada continue de soutenir le peuple ukrainien qui défend son pays contre cette attaque de Vladimir Poutine. Le Canada a réagi rapidement et Immigration Réfugiés et Citoyenneté Canada a pris plusieurs mesures pour soutenir les Ukrainiens. I think back to the early days of our planning for this particular crisis. We, in the middle of January 19th to be more precise, started preparing with an internal task force to IRCC. We began an operational readiness mission by putting biometric kits and human resources in the region to deal with the potential influx of people into Europe, to the west of Ukraine, who might be seeking to come to Canada. We made a decision at that time to waive all of the fees associated with Canada's immigration process for Ukrainian nationals. We extended the ability of people who were already in Canada to stay here so they wouldn't be forced to go back at the end of their study permit or work permit. We also started expediting every application that was in our system that was attached to a Ukrainian national. But we knew that we needed to do more. And that's why we created the Canada-Ukraine Authorization for Emergency Travel to provide a temporary safe haven to people who were seeking to find safe haven, but want it to go back when it's safe for them to do so. I'm very pleased to share that this program launched on March 17th and had a 2-week processing period. The first approval started to come in, of course, with that math at the end of March. Since that time, there have now been 41,000 Ukrainians who've been approved to come under this new expedited immigration program. This is a big deal. This is an expedited pathway to Canada for Ukrainians that provides for a 3-year stay. It can be attached to a work permit or a study permit for those who need it. And the children who come are going to be able to go to school, and they're going to have access to work and study opportunities. This is a really interesting program as well, though, because we started to bump into unique challenges along the way. We've realized that the migration flow, when you're dealing with more than 4 million people who fled their country in a matter of weeks, is unpredictable.
We're watching in real time where people are moving to and where biometrics applications are being made from, and we're adjusting accordingly by sending new teams and new resources to different cities across Europe where we're seeing large numbers of applications. We've seen changes not only to the locations of our biometrics kits and human resources, but also to the requirements. On the advice of security experts, we made a decision to waive the biometrics requirements for certain low-risk cohorts, kids under 18, people over 60 years old, and people who have a demonstrated history of travel to and from Canada. We've now made decisions in certain instances to not require a physical foil on your visa, so we can reduce the number of times in certain locations that people are actually needing to come by a visa application center. For people who showed up without having proper passports, we've been able to issue single journey travel documents. And now one of the unique facets of this particular set of circumstances that differentiates it from many other traditional refugee resettlement programs is we're not dealing with tens or hundreds of thousands of people who are sitting in one particular location after they've been approved to Canada just waiting for a flight to arrive. After people have been approved, they've been traveling to wherever they can find safety throughout Europe. And we're now reaching out to everyone who's been approved to figure out what their travel plans are, when they intend to travel, where they intend to leave from, and where they plan to arrive, so that we can be better prepared for them when they do get here. You know, it's one of the things that's, that Chris focused on was the fact that we had to not just invent a new way to approve people to get here, but to support them after they arrive. Even though most Ukrainians are arriving as temporary residents, we announced recently that we were going to extend settlement support for all Ukrainians coming to Canada under these programs in recognition of the special circumstances that they're facing. This means that they're going to have access to key services to help them settle into their new communities. This includes things like language training, employment assistance, information about how to put your kids in school. You know, communities know, settlement agencies and communities know how to help people settle in those communities best. Sometimes it's the formal things like language training. Sometimes it's about teaching people how to ride the bus in their new neighborhood, figuring out how to sign their kids up for the local soccer team, providing childcare opportunities while their parents are taking language training classes. It's going to help people find jobs. It's going to include services for women, for seniors, for youth, for the LGBTQ2+ community. This is really meaningful stuff, and I want to give a big thank you to Canada's settlement sector. It's extremely meaningful.
Pour ceci, nous allons compter sur plus de 550 agences de services d'établissement à travers le Canada qui se mobilisent pour jouer un rôle clé dans le soutien des Ukrainiens après leur arrivée. I also want to highlight that this month, the Red Cross, with support from the Government of Canada, is providing Ukrainians with arrival packages, beginning with Toronto, Vancouver, and Edmonton at the airports. These packages include key information on supports and services, as well as information in Ukrainian for people who've arrived. I actually had the opportunity when I landed at YVR earlier today. My first meeting of the day was at the bottom of the escalator. I went down and saw that the Red Cross was set up providing these services. I met people who have the capacity to provide first aid, to provide psychosocial mental health support, people who were taking information about what skills people had so they could match them with job opportunities in their community, providing people with information about how to sign up for bank accounts and social insurance numbers. These are the kinds of things that are going to ensure people don't just get here, but are set up for success once they arrive. We're also working, I should point out, despite the fact that the focus has been on this temporary residency program, a special family reunification pathway for permanent residents, and I hope to have details to share in the weeks ahead. C'est ce que nous devons faire. Nous savons que venir vivre dans un nouveau pays, même temporairement, n'est pas facile. Et nous continuerons à chercher des moyens de soutenir davantage les Ukrainiens après leur arrivée. We know we can continue to do more. And last weekend, you may have seen at the Stand Up for Ukraine pledging event, which was co-chaired by the Prime Minister, he announced additional supports for Ukrainians who were fleeing the conflict, this illegal war that's been conducted by Vladimir Putin. And for those who are arriving under the Canada-Ukraine authorization for emergency travel, we're also establishing 6 weeks of income support for people after they arrive. We're making sure that we have chartered flights that's going to help people arrive in Canada. And we're also going to extend 2 weeks of temporary hotel accommodations for those who might not have suitable arrangements right when they arrive, so they know they can get here safely. and rely on some of the supports that exist in the community going forward. Je tiens également à remercier nos partenaires provinciaux et territoriaux qui se sont mobilisés pour permettre aux Ukrainiens d'accéder aux soins de santé et à l'éducation. Your support, alongside the support of resettlement organizations across Canada, has been instrumental in making sure that those who are fleeing this war are supported before they get here and after they arrive. I'm really, really thrilled, not just my opening joke with Nathan here, but to see the provinces step up the way that they had, to see the settlement sector step up the way they had. This has been a Team Canada effort from day one. Everyone, regardless of which level of government or partisan stripe, has put up their hand and say, we want to do our part. Let's work together to do it effectively. I just get the sense that no matter where a Ukrainian national is going to arrive in Canada, with the new website being launched today, they're going to be able to access the critical information on emergency housing, on healthcare, where to apply for a SIN card, where to search for jobs since they're coming with an open work permit. Bringing together all the players across Canada on a weekly basis to identify the remaining gaps and to problem solve together is a very Canadian thing to do. Whether it's the approach that we've seen here in BC with the United Way or the approach in Toronto being coordinated by Costi and the City of Toronto, each province is developing an approach that works in their jurisdiction in partnership with the local settlement agencies that know their communities best, and also in partnership with the Ukrainian Canadian Congress provincial chapters. C'est bien plus constitué. Il s'agit d'un service essentiel pour les Ukrainiens qui cherchent un refuge sûr. I want to say thank you to the settlement sector across the entire country for once again stepping up to support newcomers in need at a time when I know they're still working very hard to deal with an influx of Afghan refugees, some of who I had the opportunity to meet yesterday afternoon in Halifax, and refugees who are coming to Canada from all around the world. This is all happening very quickly. So I'd ask those who are affected to continue to watch details as they emerge. We continue to respond in real time to the challenges that reveal themselves, and we're going to continue to keep people informed by sharing information as it becomes available. However, I'm very confident so far that the actions that we're taking demonstrate our ongoing and determined support for the people of Ukraine. I want to say a final thank you to anyone who may be watching in, who's put up their hand to say that they want to help in their own community. I know my mom's one of them, is looking forward to welcoming a family in our community after all 6 of her kids have moved out. And it feels like the most prototypical Canadian thing. And to have an opportunity to play a small part in this is a privilege and something that I'm going to keep with me for my entire life. But I can't do it alone. The federal government can't do it alone. And with partners in the provincial level and the settlement sector, I know we're going to do it together and we're going to do it well. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you, Minister Fraser. And on behalf of the settlement sector, I do wish to share our sincere appreciation for the recent changes to the National Settlement Program eligibility that will allow settlement organizations across Canada to support displaced Ukrainians through various key support programs and services funded by IRCC. I am now pleased to introduce the Honourable Nathan Cullen, Minister of Municipal Affairs and the Minister responsible for immigration, to make a few remarks about the work currently underway in BC. Minister Cullen.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you for the warm welcome and the introduction. I too would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking from the territory of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I'm Nathan Cullen, Minister responsible for immigration here in beautiful British Columbia. Welcome, Minister Fraser. It's very nice to see you again, Sean. Ton français a amélioré beaucoup depuis de longtemps. C'est incroyable. Voyons. Félicitations. Thank you very much, Chris, for the invitation to speak today. Thank you for hosting us in your wonderful facility here. You folks have been, Katie, Chris, all of the organizations have been incredible partners. I want to echo my federal counterparts' words about the ability to do what we do as a country is more than enabled. It's made possible by the organizations that you are representing here today. I look forward to working with you more, and more than just words of appreciation, bringing further support to the settlement groups from us here in British Columbia, because you're very much deserving of this, as we have done recently with Afghan refugees settling here in British Columbia to increase our abilities. The brutal war that Ukrainians are fleeing, the war inflicted upon them by Putin and Russia, are seeking the security that Canadians wish to provide, the comfort and refuge. Over the past couple of months, the Premier and I have had the opportunity to connect deeper with the Ukrainian community organizations in both large cities here in British Columbia and small communities. My ministry has also been in constant contact with these groups and the settlement organizations across the province, and keeping that on a constant basis to understand on the ground what is needed, where the gaps are, and what we can do more to support. British Columbians are opening up their hearts and their homes to those fleeing this violence. And similar to what you're seeing, Sean, I'm just overwhelmed by the generosity and the openness that British Columbians are showing. I just came from a tour of the Fraser Valley, and the eagerness and the anticipation from towns large and small to be able to accept people into their communities is truly nourishing for the soul. We want to ensure that every newcomer who arrives in British Columbia has access to the services and the supports that they need, where they need them, and when they need them. On April 4th, the government of British Columbia launched a new Welcoming Ukraine web portal, gov.bc.ca, Welcoming Ukraine, along with an updated BC supports accessible through a 1-800 number. These portals are doing two primary things. One is to the generous people looking to offer support through donations, through offering up their homes and spare places to live, offering up jobs and opportunities, as well as to Ukrainians who are arriving in country, in the province, looking for support. Both of these services are going to be there for them. We, alongside the settlement sector, the broader nonprofit sector and Ukrainian community are working towards this one common goal. Today, I'm pleased to share that we are announcing expansion of our existing services. Displaced Ukrainians fleeing violence will now have access to more vital community programs and services through a new partnership that we're launching with United Way of British Columbia and the BC 211 service. United Way's expanded services will automatically be available to those calling Service BC's phone line, allowing us to help more Ukrainians and families arriving from Ukraine. The expanded service will be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, multiple languages, including English, Ukrainian, and Russian. In addition to the expansion of United Way Columbia services, the province has also ensured more supports are available to help Ukrainians settle in British Columbia, including access to Work BC training and job postings, free enrollment for all children from the K-12 program, accessible and free mental health services and support for children and families, as well as domestic tuition at post-secondary institutions for Ukrainians arriving through the new federal emergency programs. BC and Canada have a long history of welcoming refugees and newcomers. The Canadian-Ukrainian Congress, the settlement agencies here in BC, we're forever in your debt. The people of British Columbia have stepped up to do their part. And alongside our federal counterparts, and to take a moment to appreciate the adaptations and the evolution of the programs and the services being offered by Canada is incredibly heartwarming, because we know, as we've been saying, we are building this as we go. We are learning and understanding what the needs are, where the gaps are, and working together to fill those. We are grateful for that continued adaptation. We are working together to make sure that those fleeing violence in Ukraine have the supports they need to live safely. I love this expression, Chris, of steady progress punctuated by the occasional miracle. I love this notion of what it is to work together in uncertain times, in an evolving situation, with people who are coming from such horrific conditions and circumstances. The very least we can do is to continue to be adapted and be visible in every way that we can as a province, as partners towards the settlement agencies, in partnership with the federal government of Canada. And I very much look forward to your questions today and our continued work together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Cullen. So for today's event, I am wearing several hats besides MC, as already shared, and the interim co-executive director of CISSA ACSEI. I am primarily the CEO of AMSSA, which is the Affiliation of Multicultural Societies and Service Agencies of BC. As the provincial umbrella association for immigrant and refugee serving organizations in BC, AMSSA is the provincial coordinator for convening stakeholders and planning for enhanced settlement supports for Ukrainian arrivals here in British Columbia. We have worked with the team at Municipal Affairs to provide feedback into the Welcoming Ukraine website and collaborated with the United Way and Red Cross to engage in process mapping so that we can complement and not duplicate efforts, ensuring gaps in services and information are filled quickly and meaningfully. We connect regularly with Ukrainian Canadian Congress to hear their concerns and listen to what they are learning every day from Ukrainians and British Columbians about how they want to help. This past week, we started to convene health authorities so they can be kept apprised of arrival information and ensure that their regions are informed about who is arriving, where they are living, and the health needs that we can anticipate. Currently, we are working with our provincial counterparts across Canada who are undertaking similar work in their own provinces and regions to determine the processes for receiving and distributing corporate donations among service providers. AMSSA will continue convening weekly meetings of our provincial steering committee to keep information flowing and troubleshooting any issues that may arise as these systems come into place, with information, resources, and FAQs on our AMSSA website, which is www.amssa.org. That one. I wish to thank the province of BC, particularly the team at Municipal Affairs, for their engagement and their dedication to working together to find the best possible solutions. I also wish to thank IRCC for their support in funding the Provincial Steering Committee's work, but also in their continuous efforts to ensure that Ukrainians have access to services that they need when they arrive. This has been another demonstration of the great partnership that our sector has with both levels of government, and we are so grateful of the continued relationship that we have to do this work together. And so with that, I would like to hand the mic over to introduce Peter Liang from IRCC Communications, and Peter is going to take us through the Q&A portion of this event. Over to you, Peter.
Et pour des questions pour le ministre Fraser, vous pouvez poser les questions dans la langue officielle de votre choix. Merci. Okay, who do we have the first question? Christine?
Hi, Cole Schisler, Black Press Media. My first question is for Minister Fraser. A global news investigation revealed that there are thousands of Afghan refugees waiting in Pakistan to come to Canada. Can you explain what the government is doing to help these people come to Canada more quickly and why it's taken so long for Afghan refugees to arrive here in Canada?
Sure. We're still good. Before I address a specific question facing unique circumstances of people in Pakistan who are seeking to come, I do want to point out that it was just barely 2 weeks ago that I was on hand at Pearson International Airport to welcome a cohort of Afghan refugees who came through Tajikistan in that particular instance that marked 10,000 Afghan refugees who've made it their way to Canada. There have been more flights that have arrived since then. There's flights arriving every week, and we're starting to see a regular pace of arrivals, and that number is going to continue to increase and increase and increase. When I'm in question period in the House of Commons, the first day I was asked this, the number on my my notepad was that there were 3,800. The next week it was 4,100, and then 4,500, and every week since I started taking questions, that number has grown. There are people arriving and starting to arrive at a regular pace. Now, the specific question that you asked will depend on the individual case that you're referring to. There are unique challenges facing people who've made it to certain third countries, including Pakistan. Some of them are tied to the means by which they entered Pakistan. Some of them entered with permission of the local government. Some of them cross the border and find themselves there and are potentially being threatened to be removed from Pakistan and obviously don't have a safe place to be. Other really unique concerns include the fact that they may need certain travel documentation to actually exit third countries, and that's not unique exclusively to Pakistan. What complicates that particular problem further is on some occasions, the travel documentation that's required is a valid Afghan passport, which can only be received if the individual is cooperating with the Taliban to get their travel document. You can appreciate that there's certain reticence for people who have fled Afghanistan because potentially of the work that they've done with the Canadian government to go and ask the Taliban for a favor. This is a listed terrorist entity that has seized control of Afghanistan. Now, there are some positive developments that have happened. I've mentioned there's people arriving regularly, but there are extraordinary challenges with respect to the mission in Afghanistan that simply don't exist with other refugee resettlement programs. And this is sort of part B of your question on general reasons that it's taking a little bit of time for some people to get through. There are thousands of people who've been approved to come to Canada that are still in Afghanistan today. If this was a matter of political will, there would have been 40,000 Afghan refugees here months ago. The realistic situation is that there is not safe passage for thousands upon thousands of people who would like to come to Canada, some of whom have been approved to come to Canada. But when you have a listed terrorist entity that seized control of the region, is not letting people leave. They've even removed Canadian citizens from a plane because they were women in that particular instance, not letting people leave the country. Even if they wanted to help us, which I can assure you they do not, I don't think they'd be very good at it. They don't know how to run an airport in a professional way. They don't know how to issue travel documents in a professional way. At every step, there are logistical concerns with respect to the mission in Afghanistan that are not present in typical or other refugee resettlement initiatives that Canada's been a part of. I hope that addresses your question. Thank you.
So next we have Christine, the Vancouver Sun.
Hi, I'm Daphne Bramham from the Vancouver Sun. I too am concerned about people in Afghanistan. I get emails quite frequently from journalists, particularly women journalists who were in a program that was funded by Canada, who are currently in hiding in Afghanistan, and they can't even get through to the Canadian government. I'm also concerned about the Syrian refugees who have been approved to come to Canada under private sponsorships and other programs. And I'm wondering, Minister, whether or not your department actually has the resources in order to do all of these programs. I think what you're proposing to do and planning to do for Ukrainians is wonderful, but does Canada really have the resources to bring those 400,000 Afghans? Do they have the resources to deal with the Syrians who we've already promised that they could come here? And do we have what we need to bring all of those Ukrainians who want to come here?
So thank you for the question. And there's no shortage of challenges, in particular after the COVID-19 pandemic when it comes to immigration in Canada. And I don't mean to just point to this external factor as some kind of a false obstacle. The challenges have been immense in terms of how it's impacted our immigration system. You can appreciate that local public health rules in some instances have literally shut down our offices where we haven't been allowed to have people work from home in some instances as a result of the local situation with COVID-19 over the past few years. In addition, when we made a decision to pivot to welcome more permanent residents who were already in Canada on a temporary basis during the pandemic when the borders were closed, people were continuing to apply from third countries to come to Canada. So there's never been more demands on our immigration system in Canada, but I don't think we can use the fact that we're facing a lot of demands to not do the right and just thing when a humanitarian crisis erupts in the world. With respect to Syria, we have now resettled somewhere in the ballpark of 80,000 Syrian refugees. This is an extraordinary contribution from a resettlement perspective that Canada has made. There are others who will be continuing to apply, but just because you apply to come to Canada doesn't mean that it's going to come immediately or even quickly. The refugee resettlement process, just to put it into perspective, before the situation in Ukraine worsened, there was 86 million displaced persons around the world. It might be that 1% of those people ever get resettled. This is a sad fact of the world we live in. We're going to continue to do our part to do more and more. If people want to come to Canada, they will have to apply and go through the process that they have. With respect to Afghanistan, we felt that we had a moral obligation to help those who've helped us and to also make a contribution to a severe humanitarian crisis. We will be able to meet our goal to resettle 40,000 Afghan refugees by next year. We will continue to process the applications that come in from other parts of the world. And I should point out as well that the humanitarian crises that exist in the world are not limited to Ukraine and Syria and Afghanistan. There are terrible humanitarian crises all over the world, and we continue to maintain a focus on all of them. We're doing this in a context where we also have the most ambition that we've ever had for our ordinary immigration programs outside of our humanitarian commitments. But this is the reality. The reality is that we believe that embracing immigration, embracing refugee resettlement is a good thing for Canada. We are backing up all of these commitments with financial commitments, so we have the resources to process them. I note with respect to Ukraine, for example, we're not pulling from existing resources. The Prime Minister has announced $117 million to make sure that we can actually properly fund the effort. Similarly, with the effort in Afghanistan, there are budgetary measures that we have proposed and in some instances are still being debated in the House of Commons to ensure that we have the financial means to do this. The reason we can do so much is because we continue to plan for it. We continue to advance the investments that are required, and on occasion it will require parliamentary blessing as well. But I have faith that we will have the financial resources made available to complete these missions, despite the fact that they may be be of an order of magnitude that is hard to imagine for many countries in the world.
You want maybe we can ask a follow-up question if nobody else has. Oh. Yep, go ahead. Maybe after that, if you don't mind, yes.
Monsieur Cullen, Isabelle Barcel pour Radio-Canada. Je voudrais savoir ce que met en œuvre la Colombie-Britannique pour accueillir les réfugiés ukrainiens, s'il y a déjà un nombre de logements disponibles, préétablis, et s'il y a déjà des places qui sont réservées dans les écoles, par exemple.
Oui, c'est ça. Merci pour les questions. C'est un grand défi pour nos provinces. Comme j'ai mentionné à le ministre fédéral que les crises de logement en général, logement abordable, c'est quelque chose pour nous comme une province. C'est un défi énorme. Mais dans ce cas aussi, on a la communauté qui veut faire la donation, l'opportunité qui n'existe pas dans le marché typique. Donc pour nous sommes préparés pour ça. C'est cher maintenant, le logement ici à Vancouver, pas seulement à Vancouver, à toute la province par rapport. Donc c'est quelque chose pour nous, pour avoir une conversation avec notre partenaire ici dans le groupe et aussi la communauté ukrainienne et aussi avec nos partenaires fédéraux. Qu'est-ce qu'on va faire? Les défis dans chaque province vont être différents. Pour nous autres, le logement, c'est le premier, le deuxième et le troisième défi. Et les autres. C'est pour ça, aujourd'hui, on annonce pour l'accès à l'école, c'est gratuit pour les élèves pour entrer effectivement maintenant. Et un accès aussi à l'école secondaire pour l'université et le collège. On va faire quelque chose ensemble aussi. Donc, on va voir l'habilité, la communauté pour accepter la quantité de réfugiés maintenant, mais avec 40 000 acceptés de cette instance, 42, c'est quelque chose pour nous réaliser avec une quantité de presque 17% de la communauté ukrainienne canadienne qui habite ici au Colombie-Britannique. C'est quelque chose que nous réalisons 20% plus ou moins. C'est la quantité pour nos efforts et les attentes sont les suivants. Et merci pour la question.
Merci. Peut-être pour les bénéfices des autres, on pouvait répondre des questions en anglais. So the question is about the housing crisis and the availability of school places for all these refugees. I've just asked Mr. Cullen to perhaps repeat the answers in English for the benefit of others.
Sure, I'll be much clearer in English, I'm sure. As we've worked with our partners in the settlement agencies, the Ukrainian Canadians that live in BC, and in our conversations with the federal government, our first, second, and third challenge in British Columbia is housing. Our ability to have housing across the spectrum from market-based to very affordable is proving a challenge. We're building a lot, and the needs are greater. Last year in BC, we accepted 100,000 new residents into our province, the highest level, I believe, since the early 60s. And that's creating a challenge for us. We all know what the housing prices are like and the crunch on affordability. A slight difference with this circumstance is the generosity of British Columbians opening up spaces that are not market-based housing. These are people that are offering us their vacation rentals. They're offering us suites, and we're seeing that through the settlement agencies and through the Canadian-Ukrainian Congress, which we're working very closely, and capturing all that through our new efforts with United Way and the other settlement groups. With respect to schools, we have announced today, and we were ready for this, the ability to have access tomorrow for Ukrainian students from K to 12 and their ability to enter into Canadian schools, along with free and very low-cost mental health supports, because we suspect that will be one of the great needs facing some of these families who have escaped incredible trauma and a cost that a British Columbian would face in terms of entering post-secondary. These will be things that we're going to have to work on together to continue to evolve and adapt the federal programs, the provincial programs, and the supports that we can give at the community level.
So, if there are no other questions, maybe, yes, go ahead with your follow-up.
Actually, I'd like to follow up on the question you just answered. And what you're announcing today, so is the federal government going to be doing transfer payments to cover the Ukrainians to the provinces? will it come in, I mean, if it follows traditional patterns, most of the people will probably want to go to Toronto, Vancouver. How is that going to be paid for, and is it going to be a transfer payment? Is it going to be per capita? Is it going to be a lump sum? How are you going to do this, and have you reached those agreements yet?
I'll answer. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, happy to let him take it, but I know he'd overcommit us. Look, the reality is so far the programs that we've listed federally are being covered by the federal government. The ones that Minister Cullen has shared are being covered by the provincial government. So just to give you a quick snapshot of some of the things that we're covering, we've announced that we'll be doing chartered flights, 6 weeks of income support, and 2 weeks of temporary accommodations for people who aren't able to find suitable arrangements on their own. That's in addition to the settlement services that are typically extended to permanent residents that we're making available to Ukrainians despite the fact they're coming on a temporary basis. And that's also in addition to the services being provided by the Canadian Red Cross, including some of the airport reception services and some of the welcoming measures that they're putting in place. One of the challenges that you've just sort of hit on, I wouldn't predict. I would be careful to not predict anything about where people are going to travel to, because we're seeing in the early days that a lot of the people who are traveling or applying to come to Canada have a pre-existing connection to Canada. You'll be well aware that about 3% of Canadians have Ukrainian heritage, and disproportionately find themselves in Western Canada. I wouldn't be surprised at the end of the day if we see a significant number of people end up going to smaller communities in the prairie provinces. Before we fully understand what the picture is going to look like, we're going to have real world data. I mentioned sort of in this build it as you go spirit we discussed over the course of our remarks today, some of the surprises that we've seen about where our applications are coming from. It will shock no one to hear the number one place people have applied from is Warsaw, but the number two is Berlin. And I was very surprised to see that, because that just geographically didn't make sense to me. But when you start to see real world data come in, you have to adjust accordingly. So we'll continue to monitor the situation as it goes forward, but for now the federal supports that are in place are the ones that I've discussed today.
5 more minutes. It's a pretty long Q&A. Yes. Okay, so follow-up question from this gentleman. Thank you.
This one's for Minister Fraser again. Will Canada's response to Ukrainian refugees be the new standard for all refugees looking to come to Canada in the future?
I've seen that kind of a question come up, and I think it's really important that we don't use a sledgehammer when you need a scalpel. This particular program was designed to respond to a very particular humanitarian situation. If I want to compare this to other humanitarian crises that involved an armed conflict, we're dealing with a response weeks after the further invasion by the Putin regime was commenced. If we look at the situation in Syria, for example, Canada's refugee commitments really kicked off 3 years after the civil war had broken out. We had, by the time Canada had made a decision at the end of 2015 to make a significant contribution to that refugee effort, we had hundreds of thousands of people who'd already left Syria, who found themselves in refugee camps in Jordan and in Lebanon, who'd been processed by the UNHCR, who were waiting to be approved by countries who would take them, and we could send a plane over and bring them here. But we also were dealing with people who had no realistic prospect of going back to their country of origin. I think about the people in Afghanistan who were being persecuted by the Taliban, who've now seized control of Afghanistan. The people I spoke with yesterday afternoon, I mentioned in Halifax, they had tears in their eyes because their heart was breaking knowing that they're never going to return home. When I speak to Ukrainians who are coming here, who've been approved here, when I speak to the Ukrainian Canadian Congress who have family members that are on their way here, they intend to stay temporarily. They want a safe haven. We're hearing on the ground that a lot of people are actually applying to the Canadian program as an insurance policy. They don't know with certainty that they're going to travel here. Many of them will. Certainly many of them will. Thousands, tens of thousands will. But there are others who want to wait and see how the conflict plays out before they make that final decision. We also know that these people have safe passage and can travel from more or less anywhere in Europe to Canada, not just on charter flights, but on commercial flights. We know that many of them have relationships in Canada that allowed them to get here very quickly because their family was willing to support them when they arrived. One of the things that's really important when we design this temporary protection model is to not lose sight of the fact that there's going to have to be a rebuilding effort on the back end of this war. When I speak to Ukrainian members of parliament, they said, we're very happy for you to provide safe haven to our fellow countrymen. You're not allowed to keep them. We're going to need their talent back. This solution would not work in a situation where we know that the people who are vulnerable and seeking a place to find refuge will never have a chance to go home. So there may be applications in the future that allow us to use a similar model where there is a temporary disruption to a person's ability to live safely in their country of origin. But I would be very, very careful not to assume that the new program we've invented in response to this unique crisis would have a blanket application in all future humanitarian crises.
So perhaps time for one last question, perhaps for our settlement colleagues.
It's like question period.
No. Yes. Thank you.
And I'm playing Nathan Cullen.
No, please, no. He was too hard on us.
One of the groups who there's a special program for that we've heard very little about recently are the Hong Kong, is the special program for people coming from Hong Kong. And I'm wondering if you could just update a little bit on that. Are there very many people who have taken up Canada's offer to either return to Canada or come more quickly because of their involvement in the democracy movement?
Look, I'll ask for your forgiveness and commit to a follow-up to give you current numbers. I just didn't have a chance to look at anything here today. Again, a unique situation, though. This is a group that we're using, and Corinne, correct me if I'm wrong, an electronic travel authorization in that circumstance for, which demonstrates, again, the unique nature of our ability to use unique tools for unique reasons why people might be seeking to come to Canada. Just in terms of the actual uptake, I just don't have it front of mind, and I don't want to commit a foul here by announcing the wrong number, but we'd be happy to provide whatever details you'd like on the back end of today.
And I'd be happy to follow up that. So
okay, thank
I'll
you.
be able to provide
Look, he's doing my work for me.
Yes. Great. So, thank you. Well, on that note, if there are no any other questions, merci à notre panel et merci pour toutes vos questions. Thank you so much.
Merci.